Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Kate Wilson.
And I'm Anna Shaw. And today we're doing a special sponsored podcast episode with Backbase. So it's a little bit different, but the premise for this session is that new to bank balances for customers that are originated in a branch are still 10 times higher than accounts originated digitally at some banks. And this is according to the financial brand. And it's not because less valuable customers are opening digital accounts. Rather, there are currently customer experience gaps between the way accounts are onboarded in person as opposed to digital channels. So without an aggressive onboarding process, the value of new digital accounts opened are less likely to grow to the extent that they might otherwise. So for this podcast episode, Kate's going to start us off with some RFI data, and then we'll head into a panel with special guests from Heritage Bank and Backbase. So over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Anna. What I'm going to start off with today, a bit of a different podcast episode. So I'm going to start off by sharing some RFI research. So if you are listening to the podcast, please do feel free to go and watch the webinar to see the slides, but I'll also be talking about the data that I'm going through and really setting ourselves up for quite a good panel discussion in a few moments' time. But what I wanted to talk about today, and relying really on some of the recent research we've been doing at RFI, is looking at the customer onboarding experience, and in particular what we're seeing in terms of the importance of digital and how digital is changing. One of the things we've been looking at quite a lot, obviously, through the last 18 months and through the pandemic is what's been happening in terms of digital banking usage and what does that mean in terms of changing customer expectations. We've already seen quite a high rate of digitalisation in terms of customers using digital channels when performing different day-to-day banking tasks. Australia has one of the highest rates of digital banking usage in the world, actually. What we've seen through the pandemic is really a shift in terms of the uptake of mobile banking. So while we've always seen really high rates of digital banking adoption in Australia, we're really starting to see that shift towards mobile really accelerated. So throughout the course of 2020 and into 2021, we've seen a rapid uptake in terms of proportion of consumers who are using mobile banking channels on a regular basis. So digitalisation speeding up, but also shifting a little bit in terms of how customers are behaving. And this podcast is going to be talking about onboarding. So the other key point that I wanted to mention in terms of what we're seeing in our data is just the fact that we're starting to see customers become more comfortable with the digital onboarding process. When we look at how customers would feel about applying for different products via digital channels, we generally get a pretty high proportion of customers who are comfortable doing the entire process online. If we're talking about a pretty basic product, a transaction account, a savings account, even a credit card, we actually see over 50% of consumers who say, I would be pretty comfortable doing this completely online. There's also an additional about 20% of customers who are comfortable doing parts of the application online. I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment because there's an important point there, I think, around how customers are starting to use digital but want that omni-channel support and want to know that there are people there to talk to as they're going through a digital application. If we're looking at more complex products, so personal loans and mortgages in particular, a smaller proportion of customers are comfortable performing that application completely online. But as I said, that's where that omni-channel experience really does come to play. There is opportunity to digitize parts of the onboarding process to create a better customer experience. It's just about making sure that customers do feel like they still have that support as they're going through the application journey. And if we break that down a little bit further and we start to think about different parts of an application journey for a customer when they're applying for a new product, we actually see in our data that there's a pretty high rate of customers who are comfortable doing different parts of the journey online. And actually most of the journey, customers' preference would be to do that stage of the journey via digital channels. Where you still see preference for face-to-face channels is generally at the end of the application journey. So when we're looking at things like ID verification, sharing documents, signing documents, there still is a bit of a preference for face-to-face for customers. That is potentially being driven by the fact that customers still feel like they need to do those things online. Still feel like they need to do those things in person. So not really being aware of things like DocuSign or not understanding how those bits of the process would work. There also, I think, is an opportunity to make sure that customers are able to perform different parts of the journey via online channels. But as I said before, making sure they still have that omni-channel experience, they still have access to call centers, they still have access to face-to-face channels where they need support, where they need help, where they're asking a question. So when we're thinking about what parts of the application journey can be digitized, really there is an opportunity to digitize throughout the application journey, but with that backup support for customers. And if we overlay an age lens on this, we actually see even higher rates of appetite for digital channels across every part of the application journey. So we can expect that this trend will continue as younger customers who've had their expectations set by the highly digital world that they live in, the way that they've always interacted with their banks, they're going to start to expect that across different application journeys as well. The other point I just wanted to make before we start to think about, before we go into the panel, is just there are still a few key pain points when we look at digital application journeys. So while customers are becoming increasingly comfortable using digital throughout the application journey, there are still some areas that need to be worked on and need to be improved to make sure that that customer journey is meeting customers' expectations and is creating in a good outcome for the customer. When we look at our data at RFI, one of the key things that we see throughout online applications is a couple of key pain points, in particular related to either speed, so the perception of how long something is going to take not meeting up with customer expectations, and then also around communication. So there is a key pain point there about making sure that when you are, when a customer is going through a digital channel where they don't have that direct communication, that there is still that element of feeling like they've been taken care of by the bank, that they have that access to someone if they need to ask questions, that they still know what is happening in the process as well. And if we think about the fact that customers maybe have quite high expectations in terms of speed when they're going through an online channel, expecting it's going to be quicker and more convenient than going via another channel, it is important to make sure that banks are also meeting those expectations, but also communicating back to customers in terms of how long things are actually going to take, so they feel like they are still connected to the bank as they're going through the application journey. And customer service is probably the other one that I would mention there as well, making sure that customers still do feel connected, still do feel like they're receiving service from the bank, and that helps to drive that longer term valued customer relationship as well. If we look at how do we get customers to go online to a greater extent, there definitely is an opportunity to support customers through that omni-channel experience and making sure that customers feel like they can start an application online, but if they've got questions, if they get stuck, there are other channels there that are able to support them. When we look at our research and we ask customers what would encourage them to go online, the number one thing is I want the ability to stop, start and save my application. So I want to know that I don't lose my progress. I want to know that I can go off and find the information I need, so I can ask a question. I'm still going to be able to go through and finish that application that I've started. And then the final point I wanted to make, and I think this will come up in the panel as well, is just the fact that we're starting to see that shift in terms of what customers expect from digital. So digital onboarding is really important, having the right digital experiences for customers, right digital channels and access to different parts of an onboarding experience. But if we think beyond the onboarding experience and that ongoing relationship with customers, there's also a key point here that customers are starting to think more about digital as a differentiator. So when they're choosing a bank, they're expecting digital, really good digital banking, they're expecting really good mobile banking apps, but also customers are starting to look at those new features. So when we look at our research, what we see is that customers who are looking to switch their banks in the next 12 months are actually starting to look for some of those more PFM type features. So they're looking for the ability to budget better, the ability to track their savings better. Some of the newer features that we're starting to see in the market are really important for customers, and that's something that we can expect will continue as we start to see more of those features being released. So digital important, obviously, in the onboarding experience and having the right channels there for customers, the right experience for customers. But if we think about an ongoing relationship with customers as well, there's also that key point around the fact that customers are expecting really good digital, really good mobile banking apps, and you need to be able to provide that to customers for that ongoing relationship as well. I will start the panel in just a moment. So what I will do is I will invite my panelists to the discussion. So Sean from Heritage and Iman from Backbase. Thank you so much for joining us today. Would you both like to introduce yourselves? Iman, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Kate. Hello, everyone. My name is Iman Ghodosi. I'm the Regional Vice President for Backbase in Asia Pacific. Great to be with you today.
And I'm Sean Clancy, the Head of Digital CX and Sales at Heritage Bank.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for joining us today. Let's get started with the conversation. And what I really wanted to start off with, some of what we saw in that research was about managing those customer expectations, especially during an onboarding experience, and especially around sort of time and what customers are going to be asked to do as they go through an application journey. What I would be really keen to start off with, and a question for both of you, how do you get that balance right between speed and expectation management from a customer perspective when during the onboarding experience? Sean, let's start with you on that one.
Obviously, they go hand in hand. So no matter what your process or business is, you're trying to set people up to expect what you're going to deliver. So for us, speed is part of a CX measure we call ease, which is, again, part of about half a dozen other CX measures in our program. So we are basically trying to tackle that from both sides. So do what you can as much digitally. We're going through a transformation project at the moment with our origination platform to try and make that easy and speed our internal processes up. But the other side too is simply just making the process more transparent to people. So like I said in the research earlier, keeping people up to date, giving them some way they can log into to see progress, and giving them some idea of how long some of those things will take.
And Iman, how do you get that balance right from your perspective?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Sean on that one. Speed and expectation management, they pretty much go hand in hand in the new world, right? So if we look at what's happened around us with COVID, that's really accelerated, digital transformation in a lot of organizations. So, and what we're seeing is in a post-COVID world, we're all starting to act like millennials, right? And the traits of those customers are they want access to anything, anywhere on their terms, right? And the relationship and the expectations they have on banks has changed quite dramatically compared to some of the other some of the other age groups that we've seen. So, and I'll give you an example on a personal level. My father 5 years ago would insist on going into a branch and withdrawing cash because he would want to have that human engagement and human element, right? I was very surprised when I saw him about a year ago that he's using his Apple Pay on his phone to pay for things, right? So that's that's the shift and the change that we're seeing in the sentiments. Now, where I think if we sort of step back a bit, what's happening around us is what we all now living in what I call like the Netflix or the Uber economy, which really is that engagement economy. It's all about putting the customer in the center of everything you do and building business models around the customer, and that's what some of these disruptors have been able to do using technology to become the captains of their industry. Technology is just an enabler of this paradigm shift, and we're seeing that in banking and financials as well. But if you look at, if we take the Netflix example, and why is Netflix so successful, right? And they've overtaken all the movie studios and all the TV studios and everything else, is they truly understand, right, what you and I want, right? So they've been able to build that engaging relationship, right? Trying to understand what are our habits, what do we like to watch, when do we start a show, when do we stop a show, which episode we start, we stop, at what time of the day we watch it. So all of these data points, it's enabled them to service us better, and we're seeing this more and more in every other industry. Every industry is right now trying to figure out that whole, how do you turn that traditional engagement model, right, into a meaningful digital engagement? And at Backbase, we 100% believe that that's what's going to take to build the next set of banks to provide that digital experience that creating banks that people love.
So I like your story about your dad using Apple Pay. I think we always assume that there is still a big generational gap, and that younger customers are doing everything digitally and older customers are doing everything via branch and with cash. But a lot of that has changed. Even in just the last few years, we're starting to see that speed of change speed up quite a lot.
I think that change has been forced upon us, right?
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
I'd be curious to know what you guys think would be one thing that you could fix that would have the biggest impact on customer onboarding. If you could change one thing, and sure, we might start with you and thinking about the Heritage Bank onboarding experience. What's the one thing that you think could improve the experience for customer onboarding for the industry?
Something that's probably a bit hard for the industry to tackle, which is why it's still a problem, I guess, is just the complexity of trying to onboard someone. And in a lot of ways, the regulations that have come out are there for a reason, for a good reason. But then it also makes it more and more difficult to onboard people. So we do get typically a lot of customers that would love to bank with us for various reasons, and even just that repetitive information gathering, the complexity of that process, it can turn people away. I think going forward, my hope is with something like open banking could help speed that, like improve that quite a bit, where people could basically just go and share those accounts between the different banks that they have, or anything else that they have with us as they're onboarding, and so they're not typing their name in again, not typing their ID in again, and all those sorts of things that ends up taking an hour or longer for certain people. So yeah,
I think that frustration that customers have of feeling like they've already provided information, having to provide it again, and even Iman, you made the point before about us living in a Netflix and an Uber world where customers have a lot of pre-filled information when they're doing other things, and having to have a very different experience when they're going through a banking onboarding process, I imagine, is a pain point as well. Is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of things that could be changed to improve the onboarding experience?
We've also got those issues around accessibility. So if there's, being a bank, we serve everyone, and irrespective of whether it's your target market or not, there's a lot of people out there that still have trouble reading or even just understanding what these products are about. And the more complex this onboarding process becomes, the more difficult it is for those people. And we're seeing that's really having an impact on them being able to do it digitally. So we've got this research is probably about a year ago, so there's a lot that's happened in the last year as far as digital adoption is concerned. But a year ago, we only had about 20% of the people we surveyed were comfortable doing the entire mortgage process online. And if you've got a couple, then that drops to 10% potentially, because the other person's not not comfortable, and so they still call or go in branch or something like that. And it's just simply the complexity of the product that's causing that, not necessarily like this was not just heritage customers, it's just irrespective of the system you have, people aren't sure, and so they sort of need to be walked through that process because it is so complex at the moment.
Absolutely. Iman, anything you would add to that in terms of how we can improve the customer onboarding experience?
Well, look, I think if we just look at what we're getting used to is, so my question is, why does it take so long? Why is there so many steps, right? And as I think as your research suggested, one of the first things that people want is the ability to stop and start, right, and have that omni-channel experience. Because if we don't give them that, there is a high chance of drop off. There is a high chance of frustration with the consumer, and it just changes the sentiment and that relationship and engagement that they would have with the financial institution. So I think we've got a great opportunity to streamline some of these processes and build a journey which is engaging for the customer, especially when as Sean mentioned, we're embarking on open banking. The banks have a lot of our data anyway, so it should just be a lot more smoother or streamlined process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's still so much complexity and friction in the onboarding experience, which hopefully open banking starts to help solve for. And staying with you, Iman, I'd be curious to know, thinking about other case studies around the globe in banking or outside of banking, are there any industries any organizations that you would hold up as being a benchmark of really good customer onboarding, and what can we learn from those case studies?
Yeah, look, Kate, I think we can learn a lot from some of the onboarding journeys of the digital disruptors, right? These are, again, companies that have been able to, become the leaders in their various industries over the last decade. But for now, we should stick to banking, because one of the challenges we have in financial services is the regulations, right? Which some of these other industries don't have. So whilst it may work really well for a Netflix or an Uber, then it's like a so what in a bank. So a good example of a customer that we have worked with here at Backbase in Austria is BKS Bank, right? They're one of the leading car and vehicle leasing banks in Austria, right? And some of the things that they've been able to do by implementing some of the things that we're talking about is they've reduced the time to process a lease application by 90%, right? So, and they've done that by reducing the time to submit the lease application by 75%. And how they've done that is, again, they've made a lot of it self-service, and they've made it really, really easy for the customer to go through that journey. And when they measured this post-implementation, they're now up to it's an average time to complete an application is now around 5 minutes. So if you think about that, and in that context of what they've been able to achieve now, that what that journey looks like, right? And the key aspect there is that self-service, right, of the origination across all the channels. What is that opportunity for them to do it for in other lines of business and for other products? So it is possible to achieve some of the things that we're saying we have to achieve, right, and to provide that better engaging experience. And we're seeing that in fragments of the market around the world in our customers that have been able to achieve some of these things.
And the other thing that came out of the research, and I know is also quite topical, is the idea that having a really good digital onboarding experience is really important, but we're also starting to see just changing customer expectations around digital more broadly. In your opinion, how do we turn a great digital onboarding experience into ongoing digital engagement with customers?
Look, onboarding to us really is, we look at that as sort of the entree and a process flow that really sets the tone for the relationship, right? You can very, very quickly figure out what that ongoing relationship is going to be based on how easy and how fast you can onboard onto a new institution. But really, for us, we break it down, that great digital experience, we break it down into 4 key components, right? The first component is you're going to have to think about ultimately the customer. So you got to build your processes and your systems and your business all around how do you delight the customer at every touch point in every channel, right? The second point would be, how do you empower your employees? So it's all well and good to have a really nice front end for the customer, but if your employees, your relationship managers, don't have the same level of access to the same kind of data, exactly where a customer is on a particular journey, well, the process falls apart, right? And again, a good example of a company that's really figured this out is Uber, and it's super simple, right? When you look at booking an Uber as a consumer, you and a driver are on the same platform. You're seeing the same thing. So when you connect and engage, you know exactly where you're at, right? And again, we can bring that into the world of banking. So at every touch point, at every engagement, both the employee and the customer are aligned exactly where something is up to. Thirdly, it's all about orchestrating value, right? So again, we talked about technology and all the enablement that brings. There is a lot of fintech companies or fintech partners that will help you in that process. You no longer have to build everything. So if you think about, KYC, you talk about AML, things like that, you can integrate all of these things into that journey, into that process to make it smoother for the end customer and also give you the compliance that you need. And lastly, and this is, it's an overused word, but digitize the operations and automate all your processes, right? So that's what digital transformation is all about. But the thing that you got to remember is, you can automate a process, but you can't automate a relationship, and that's the key here, right? How do we go from digitizing processes, but also, how do you build that engaging relationship with your end customers?
Yeah, and on that topic of building customer engagement and building relationship with customers, Sean, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on where branches fit into this. So we've seen a number of banks choosing to close branches over the last 12 months or so. We've seen obviously increase in digital usage and that speeding up of digital adoption driven by the pandemic. But Heritage is actually opening new branches. Could you talk a little bit about why Heritage is increasing its branch network at the moment?
For Heritage itself, there's actually quite a number of reasons. Iman's hit on the exact thing. You can't automate a relationship. Well, you can, but people don't trust it. There's always, our value proposition is really around that relationship. It's extremely important to the bank, and there's a lot of things going digital from a bottom line point of view, so that they can serve people cheaper and that sort of thing. And we feel like that with the mutual banking model, that is something that we can provide. We can utilize that extra benefit that we get through that model to have that relationship there. One of the things that we see as well is basically there's a compression of the branch networks, but not necessarily an elimination. So where in I'm in Toowoomba, for example, about I think 170,000 people here. Some of the banks, the larger banks, may have had like 4 or 5 branches, and they've gone down to 1 or 2, but they haven't taken them out of the town. Like they're still there. And for us, most of our branch network is in Queensland, New South Wales, and so for us, we're sort of just trying to expand that reach out, and basically use digital to fill the gaps. So where you might have 2 or 3 branches right next to each other because everyone needed to be able to drive there really quickly, it's more about there's a branch in town. If I need it, when I go to do something big, I'm starting a business, I'm doing a home loan, I'm trying to refinance, like these huge decisions for people, life-changing decisions that they're not sure about. And at the moment, digital is fantastic if you know what you want to do. You can just go in and go online and do it in your gym jams at 9 o'clock at night, and that's awesome. But when you're trying to make those huge life decisions, you might be having a kid and you think, oh, now I've got to buy a house and a car. How am I going to do this? Those sorts of conversations are really what branches excel at. And there's also, especially for us to compete with the majors as well, trust is a key driver for people. So again, just literally the presence of the branch nearby is enough for people to go, oh, okay, they might be looking online at one of the affiliate comparison websites, and they see our logo and it's like, oh yeah, I've seen them in the shopping mall. When I've done my shopping, I've never stepped foot in it, but at least I know that they're here. So it helps with quite a lot with that as well. As mentioned before, there's still activity that currently needs human contact. You can do your home loan and lapse, home loan online, those sorts of things. But coming back to the accessibility issues, there's not necessarily literal accessibility issues, which can be part of it too. You have issues reading, but literally just understanding the products. One of the other things we do too is the mobile lenders can be based in a branch. They've got somewhere to go back to. So again, even if customers aren't coming in as much, the mobile lenders need somewhere to work from to go out to people to talk to them as well.
I think what our research has shown is while we're seeing customers increasingly using digital channels, customers still like the idea of a branch being there just in case, which I think goes to what you're saying about if I'm refinancing my mortgage, if I'm making a really big life decision, just knowing that there's someone there that I can go and talk to is something that's still quite important for customers. So I'll stay with you. I would be curious to know what Heritage looks for when you're partnering with a technology vendor. What's important in that relationship?
for us, a lot of it sort of comes back to the relationship and shared values. So we need to be able to partner with someone that understands that we're a mutual. We don't exist to make money. We make money so that we can provide a better service, basically. So that's something that we like to make sure that at least the vendor understands.
And a couple of final questions before we wrap up. We spoke a lot about onboarding and the role of digital onboarding, and the fact that some customers are happy to go online for a lot of their different product relationships. Some customers still want that face-to-face element or want that omni-channel element. Do you think we will get to a point where 100% of customers are onboarded digitally? Do you think that is something that we will achieve? And if so, how far away will we be from that?
Well, I think there's sort of a couple of answers to this. So depends on your definition of digital. So there are companies out there right now that are onboarding all of their customers digitally. Having a completely digital bank is an option already now. But in saying that, as far as I understand, they still need a call center of people to help with those outside of the system problems. So a lot of my background's in systems development, web development, that sort of thing, and you can only cater for a certain amount of scenarios. There's always going to be that 1%, and the bigger your company is, there's a bigger 1% that you need to support separately. So part of it too is I think just the maturity of the platforms at the moment. They're quite good, and like I said, you can do everything online, but it's still not quite at that point where we can just go everyone does it that way.
The definition of digital is a really great point. I hadn't thought about that before, but even if you're emailing someone, you're talking to a real person, but that's maybe technically digital. So yeah, maybe it's about where do real people fit into a digital experience.
That's it, yeah. And from our perspective, for example, we're offering Zoom calls for appointments with staff are sitting in branch, and people are Zooming in when they can't make it due to COVID or just prefer that. So there's kind of, it's really like anything is where's the line that's called digital, and really we're just in a world where digital is just mixed in with the rest of life pretty much. So yeah.
They're all very familiar with Zoom by now. Iman's same question. When do you think we will get to 100% digital onboarding? Will we get there?
Look, really interesting question, right? Because I come from the technology side of it, right? And what was that? There was a Pantene ad. It won't happen overnight, but it will happen, right? And I think that really, for us resonates here. If we look back at, iPhone only came out in 2007. Now think about the impact that's made in our daily lives. The ability to have a smartphone in your pocket and everything that you do and how we rely on it. But back in 2007, half the population was still using dial-up internet, right? For your audience that knew what that was, that was the old modems, right? So, but today that's all changed, right? Digital is our life. And I think again, if I can go back to what we were talking about before, some players have figured out how to make digital engaging and collaborative, right? And I think they're the ones that are winning. And I'll give you an example, right? Everybody knows Facebook, but what some people may not know is Facebook's not the first person or the first company that came out with a social network. There was a company called MySpace that were actually the first ones to it. They both had the same idea, right? But one figured out how to become engaging and do the engagement piece better than the other, right? MySpace had built this platform around, it's a digital space for you to build a digital profile and for people to come and see, hey, what are you up to, Kate, right? But Facebook changed it a bit and said, well, you know what, we're going to build a single unified platform for you to be able to engage with your friends, family, and now what we're seeing is commerce, right? Everybody knows Facebook. Facebook is where they are today because of that engagement layer. MySpace died a very quick death. Right. So, and we're seeing that in banking, right? Everyone can build a mobile or a web digital front end. That's not the hard bit, right? Everyone's got a digital story, everyone's got a digital strategy of some sort. But where we're seeing the banks that are winning, right, and are taking market share and are becoming, part of our daily lives, are the ones that are doing it on an engagement platform in mind, right? So it's not just about the technology, but it's about building that technology on an engagement banking platform that will have the customer in mind. And for us, if we can, if we see that, yeah, I absolutely believe we'll get to a scenario where 100% of customers will be onboarded digitally.
Yeah, I remember MySpace. Great point. We've come very far in not a lot of time, and customer expectations are being changed by all of those other platforms that they're using as well. I'll finish up with a final question for you, Sean. It'd be good to get some advice from a Heritage Bank perspective. If there are other banks out there who are looking at what you're doing, what advice would you give to those other banks?
Basically, can't be all things to all people. So we utilize external vendors quite a bit, get us out of our little bubble, I guess, and use those people to basically get that fresh perspective but get that capability in house as well. So we'll gather that advice and integrate that with our way of working. You may spin up a whole team to do a certain thing, but you've sort of got to think, well, is that really our core business or not? And once you spin the team up, it's great for a while, and then they get sucked into the bubble and aren't really looking outside enough either. So particularly for organizations of our size, we're sort of big enough to make an impact, but then small enough that there might only be one person that's the SME for that thing. So we'll use the special, the skills of that person day to day, and then when we're trying to do something outside of that, we might get a vendor to do some research advice, or provide us something they've already built, rather than trying to spin up a whole team and build it all ourselves each time.
I think an increasingly common idea within the industry, having different people focused on what they do well and then working together and partnering to bring the best experience possible to the customer.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
Thank you so much for your time today. It was great chatting to you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Global Digital Banker podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and Podbean.